Hi, I'm Jaden Van, and today my partner Hannah Shepard and I will be discussing the type of government known as oligarchy. Now, to begin, oligarchy is a word which derives from the Greek root oligoi, meaning rule of the few. Oligarchies are often considered the cousin of democracy, which we will revisit later. Now, what exactly do we mean when we say rule of the few? Well, in essence, we are saying rule by the wealthy class. And now, moving on to the oligarchical history. The first oligarchy originated in Greece within the city-state of Sparta, which took place around 800 BC. This oligarchy stemmed from a group of rich individuals known as a council of elders, and was also developed by nobles with military authority. Now you may be wondering how exactly an oligarchy works. Well, the simple answer to this question is money. So say for example, there was a man named Joe. Joe has money, comes from a rich family, received a good education, and has experience in business. All of these things make Joe the ideal candidate to be a leader of an oligarchy. Now, say a group of rich nobles comes along seeking to recruit Joe. Joe says yes, and boom, we have an oligarchy, right? Actually, the answer is yes. This is because members are recruited based on financial status and skill level, bringing us to the idea that an oligarchy is essentially just a gang of rich people. And now you might be asking how exactly members of an oligarchy come into power. Well, there's essentially two ways that this can happen. Well, the first way is if you have one supreme leader who gets influenced by members of society that are typically from the wealthier class, because money equals power. The second way is if that gang of rich people we mentioned earlier decide to take matters into their own hands by overthrowing peasant voices and the government. Now, this can obviously have negative side effects, which brings us to our pros and cons of oligarchy. Pros of this include that anyone should be able to join as long as they have experience, which means that members of the oligarchy will be skilled in their decision making. Also, people won't have to worry so much about what is happening in the government, which allows them to focus on themselves. And lastly, men and women are able to serve equally, which allows for equal representation in government. And now for the cons. Now I want you to imagine one leader. And now I want you to imagine dozens of leaders. Because an oligarchy consists of a group of members, all with different views and opinions, decision-making can often be prolonged, which, as you may imagine, can take a very long time. Another con is that because governments with oligarchies are often influenced by rich people working in their own self-interests, individuals not from the wealthy class are only given little representation. Now, there are actually many past strong communist governments which have been said to reflect aspects of oligarchies. Now take, for example, the countries of Russia and China. Russia is a strong example of a communist government that has implemented oligarchical structures as, under the rule of Vladimir Putin, this country has used oligarchy to plunder its nation's wealth. The same process of implementing oligarchical structures can be identified in China, which has reflected strong elements of oligarchy since the creation of the Communist Party of China in 1921. Now that we've learned a little about oligarchies, we are going to cover the ways in which they are different and similar to democracies. So for oligarchies, as we mentioned earlier, since there are so many leaders making decisions, there's a longer time taken to achieve reform. Whereas with democracy, there's essentially one supreme leader, which makes making decisions much quicker. Additionally, citizens under an oligarchy are given little say, whereas citizens in a democracy help the government to make decisions. Finally, the power of an oligarchy typically comes from wealth, education, expertise, and military experience, but the power of a democracy comes from people's opinions. Now, both of these are similar because in either case, people are still ruling over others, and both forms of government place emphasis on sovereignty. Now, I'm sure this discussion has gotten you thinking about the similarities between these two types of government, bringing us to the question of, is the U.S. an oligarchy? Well, although the U.S. is claimed to be a democratic republic, it still consists of one supreme group which ultimately makes the decisions, which could show that America might still be a democracy, just one which uses oligarchical ideas. Now, if we flash back to the beginning of our discussion, you might recall that an oligarchy might arise if the government is influenced by members of the wealthy class. Well, the same situation can be seen with members of Congress, as they are often influenced by citizens seeking to use their money to their advantage, which could, in fact, lead to the conclusion that the American government does use oligarchical ideas and structures in its decision-making. Thank you for watching Hannah and I's presentation on oligarchy.